We had 52 applicants for the position. We have chosen an applicant, and we have made an offer to that applicant. He's accepted that offer, and we're now just waiting to make sure that he is physically fit and he doesn't have any drugs on him and those types of things. So, it'll be
Drug
now-
test your employees?
Excuse me?
You drug test your employees?
Yes, including our planning commission members
Okay.
on an annual basis. So you'll be
Bring it
asked to
on.
go to the bathroom.
I just took one.
Okay, good.
I'm a CDL driver and I am subject to the pool, so I just had mine. How about you guys?
Fred hopes that he will be.
They skipped us last year.
Must have been bombing fluid.
Fred hopes he'll be on job site March 13th.
A little bit of bombing fluid in your.
We'll go ahead and call the February 2nd, 2010 meeting of the Salina Planning Commission to order. Item number 1 is the approval of the summary minutes from the January 19th, 2010 meeting. Is there a motion to
I
approve?
move we approve the minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes from the January 19th meeting. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries.
What
Item-
what Alyssa was trying to do in sending this matrix out to you, and the bold is somewhat less bold, but the way that this format is set up is it has the base numbers and then sub numbers like A, B, C, D, those types of things. And so what we were trying mostly to focus on is the ones that are the main headings, and for two purposes. One, this format is a little different than what we have presently and what I have usually seen in a plan, but the matrix is kind of a policy document in and of itself, in addition to things that we ought to be doing that, or changes that we ought to be making. It's also got items in there that really are policy statements that you would use when you're reviewing a case or reviewing something like that. So some of them are tasks, but some of them are goals or policy statements. Like if you go to the you've got not the matrix up, John. You've got the one from the comp plan document, right? No, that's fine. It's just that what they have in front of them is the matrix, probably.
Good.
So the item 1.1-1 there, it says implement development according to the land use plan and the comprehensive plan. That's hopefully being done at every meeting for every case and every staff report. So that's something that's not a future task, but that's hopefully something, a policy that's ongoing, is that if you have a land use plan and the comprehensive plan, you're implementing that on a meeting by meeting basis when you're making decisions about rezoning or other things. And so we have, if you go to item LU2 there, what we were trying to get at is everybody, one of the goals or policies in the plan is that we as commissioners and as staff and everyone involved in the process, that encouraging or developing mixed-use centers that provide opportunities to live, work, and recreate in proximity to existing and new neighborhoods, as opposed to having a pattern where everything is segregated and spread out, is, since that's an important component of the plan, are you as commissioners comfortable with that's not been a goal in the past? Is that something that you as commissioners feel is a policy or goal that we should be working towards? And so that was the idea behind going through the matrix, is that do you as commissioners agree that that's the pattern or the direction we should be going towards is mixed-use centers?
We talked about that with the development at, what was that, Magnolia and Ohio?
Right. Well, Mr. Byquist was discussing that.
Right. And, you know, those kind of things are going to come up more in the future, and certainly we know from a nationwide standpoint that the mixed-use centers are, you know, getting to be a more probable way of building things, whether it's geographically feasible here in Salina in all cases, probably not, but it's certainly something that we should encourage, I think.
Okay, so did most of you on your priorities feel like that was one that should be done in the near term and not 5 years from now?
I don't remember where I put that. I think I put that as like a 2.
I put it right by your desk
Oh.
there, so you guys could discuss.
What did you all do?
Well, I actually had it as a 5 in terms of this matrix, not because it's unimportant. We have to spread some of this stuff out.
You can't do it all at once, or you've got to do it in some sequential order of things of value of importance.
And it just seemed like we've got to get the plan through first. That's still not a part of our responsibilities as of this day and time. And it seemed like there were some other policies, procedures that needed to get put in place before that.
Right,
It's
but-
important if we adopt the plan, but I don't know that it's a number 1. I had it as a 5.
I think I felt about it kind of along the same way, that it's more important to get the plan in place and how to communicate it and how to review it and keep it ongoing, that those kinds of issues, if the plan addresses them, we're going to take them one at a time as they come to us. So I kind of had it down as a important, but a kind of 2 or 3 year thing out as we get some of the more important things like some of the roadway issues and maybe using infrastructure that's available right now. Those kinds of things that command more of our attention, and spend a lot of time on that policy issue and pushing it.
Okay. And then it's kind of a companion to that, but the other sub-point there, which was land use number 3, which I think's on page 3, John. And that says, develop neighborhoods that incorporate institutional and commercial uses of an appropriate scale in character. Are these, it sounds like these things are things to aspire to, but not on day one after, let's say, a plan was adopted, that's something that's done gradually, not instantly. Is that kind of your perception?
Yes.
Because the other part of that is that if everybody perceives that mixed use is not the way to go, or you don't ever see it happening, then you shouldn't be endorsing a plan that has it. So part of this, the matrix review process, just make sure you as commissioners know and are familiar with some of the things that are being espoused as value statements or things that the community values. But I think developing neighborhoods that have institutional commercial uses and appropriate scale and character probably fits in with the mixed use concept. And then the LU4 there is probably still along the same pattern that we have a lot of today, where the airport industrial area would be an employment hub. Some of the other concentrated in industrial areas, south industrial area, those would be encompassed under there. And what that's basically saying is continue to build on those hubs that are already in existence for the types of businesses that are land intensive. I guess the next one, John, is LU 5 on page 4. And some of this is not under the Planning Commission's control. You've got to respond to that. But LU 5 is basically getting back to that center, and basically it's talking about working to create hubs like Crawford and Broadway and things like that. Did most of you see that as more of a longer term thing than something that happens immediately?
Yeah, I do.
I don't see how you force it. I guess I think those things have to come our way
Yeah.
first.
And I don't, both because there's limitations in the law and finances, and I don't see the city of Salina going out and buying up a bunch of property to force that to happen. So most of you agree that redevelopment of commercial industrial properties is something that's more in the 3 to 5 scale than the 1 scale, because it can't happen overnight. Some of those things are a little more immediate, like LU 5-4, encourage infill and continued development of South 9th Street Commercial District. I would assume most of you in our decisions at the commission level have tended to reinforce that pattern. I would assume that most of you are in agreement that areas like the Dooley Pumpkin Farm or places like that should be encouraged as infill sites for continued commercial development of that corridor.
And we've already fought that war, so to speak.
Right. And then the LU 5-5 is continued infill and redevelopment of downtown with commercial uses and supportive residential. I think that's something that's happening today, and one of the options in the matrix as opposed to 1 through 5 would be ongoing, and I guess that would be one that I think staff would identify as ongoing.
The supportive residential, Dean, is that talking about like in the downtown area, apartments above businesses? Is that?
I think it could potentially be both. It could be as as part of the things that come out of the work of Friends of the River, things like that. Maybe you'll see, encouragement of freestanding housing or apartments or townhomes along the river, but adjacent to downtown. That would be one. And then to make sure that our codes and things that we have in place are supportive of the continued loft use and development. I think it's trying to say both. And I guess those aren't mutually exclusive. I guess, would commissioners generally agree that supporting both freestanding and the accessory loft type development is something you want to see continue and ongoing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think our LU6, this is something that probably touches pretty close to Mr. Kennedy, and probably something that's been done, I would say, off and on and not consistently. And we have not, I'll say, pre-planned or incorporated planning for schools, community facilities, things like that into growth areas and new neighborhoods. It's been more a reaction to that, and I guess I'd let Ken speak to that about what you're I know you're trying to change that, and you're doing much better about, keeping the board informed about trends and data and those things, but do you think that's a fair statement, Ken, that the school district before has been more in a reaction mode to what's happening as opposed to maybe working with developers or with subdivisions to take school sites or planning into account as areas develop?
Well, I personally don't think it's just limited to schools. I think if you look at our community, at the landlocked pieces that we have, such as the hospital, such as the new Kenwood Cove area, and parks, community centers without parking. I mean, you just can go down the list, and I think 50, 60 years ago, when they were looking at those facilities, such as churches, schools, parks, hospitals, parking wasn't an issue. So there wasn't, I think, an intent to not plan, but it just wasn't an issue at that time like it is today. So yeah, I think we're trying harder as a community in all those areas to look at planning ahead of the development and not being reactive to it, because when you're reactive to it, you just don't have the space. You just can't acquire it. When houses are built on it, it's no longer available. So I think it's important, I think, for the whole community to look at that.
Yeah,
I put
I
it as
think
a high priority, because if you leave it to be reactive, you're going to pay the price later.
part of this, and we do this particularly for the larger residential subdivisions, but as if we just got a plat in that's currently under review, and it's certainly, well, it's in terms of acreage and number of lots for residential, it's probably the biggest one I've ever seen or reviewed before, and it has 208 lots in it. And I think what this is trying to say is that to keep the channels of communication open with the school district, with medical providers, with parks and recreation, that type of thing. So if you have, a piece of this is 150 acres of property, that as opposed to having 208 lots develop and every piece of property in the subdivision is developed with homes, and then the school district reacting to that and saying, boy, that's 200 homes, we better find a piece of property out there where we can put a school. It's more like integrating the school early into the process, so they could perhaps talk with the developer or whatever and say, is there any way we can incorporate or carve out a school site in your layout, so we can plan both this neighborhood, not just for housing, but for schools and parks and other things as well.
What's the city do about fire service and ambulance service?
Yeah, we have not. In some cases, we have chased development. There's been different discussions and talk off and on, including during the comp plan process, that if you were starting over or thinking more forwardly, we even had discussions once about closing the fire station at Marymount and Crawford, and not necessarily to have a new one, but simply relocating it either out to Markley or out in the vicinity of Crawford and Holmes, because that would probably be, based on the growth patterns and all, a better location, response time and otherwise. But I think, at least from my perspective, we have not always incorporated those things into the planning for new neighborhoods and growth areas. We've done like the school district. We've responded or chased after it after the fact. You get a growth area and then you realize you don't have a park, or you should have planned maybe for a fire station, or and that's what you run into if you have 4 or 5 subdivisions and none of them are planned to set aside any land for a school. Then it leaves the school district in a real hard position to find an available, well-positioned piece of land for a school. So I guess that the question is, would the commission agree that LU6, that should be something that's ongoing from day one, and the adoption of the plan, we should be working towards that goal of incorporating those things into planning for growth areas, which I don't think we've always done a good job of before. Is there any reason that you wouldn't start doing that immediately as far as an ongoing implementation item?
I don't think so. I think that's something, it's a lofty goal, but I don't know how you be anything but reactive in that unless you require developers to set aside a certain portion of land or something.
I'm not sure it's so much requiring as it is getting the school district or getting the mindset of the fire department or Parks and Recreation or the school district. And you can't always come to an agreement, but the sooner that they can become aware of that and what also is going on around it, they can at least, by getting involved early, they can sit down and have discussions with the developer and maybe, negotiate something that would allow for, you're correct that we're not going to approve your plat because you didn't set aside land for a school. That would be difficult, but I think what this is trying to say is start earlier in the process and plan for that as you see areas developing, as opposed to finding that you've approved 5 or 6 subdivisions and there's no place to put a school.
So as a practical matter, when you guys did a design review or something like that, would you include a member of the school district and the medical community and have them in Parks and Recreation, have them sit in on this and be part of that conversation?
Well, and what we do, whether or not Ken is a member of the Planning Commission or not, what we've done historically is we have tried to, very early on when preliminary plats for development or annexations are first proposed, get that to them to comment on. I mean, we have had, I know that when the Chapel Ridge apartments were built there by Central Mall, since those were built, they have been in 3 different elementary enrollment districts, because there's 288 apartments there. That's a pretty big influx for any school enrollment district to absorb. And they were built in a fairly short and occupied in a fairly short period of time. But they were initially in the Stewart School District. And so those plans were forwarded to the school district, and the response back was, there's not enough room at Stewart to accommodate these kids. So then they started planning. They ended up going and being bused to Schilling Elementary, and now I don't know if they go to Coronado now or
Coronado.
Yeah, but initially when it first opened, the residents that lived there, their children went to Schilling. The first thought they were going to go to Stewart, then they went to Schilling, now Coronado. So that's an example of having to adjust for that. But the earlier that you can involve the school district and they can plan for that, and Ken is doing that now. I mean, it's no secret that most of the housing area growth in Salina is going south and east. And so you can pretty well count on that as far as growth areas.
I think we really worked cooperatively with the city lately to make sure we're kind of knowing what's going on so we can kind of plan. I don't think that we would say that developers need to give up development space for schools, but if we know what's going on, so we can at least make the consideration is, do we need to acquire some land in that area for a school as that growth develops, so that we're not after the fact. It's impossible when you're after the fact. You may not be able to get land where the infrastructure's there. You may have to condemn, which is the ugly process you never want to have to use if you can avoid it. So most districts, and most schools that are in communities that are growing, the school actually acquires the property along with the developers and carves that out, so the development is focused around the schools. And your fire stations would be the same thing. Regional hospitals or centers, hospital centers, medical centers would be the same way. So I think we have to. It's just a mindset. It's a mindset that as you think of development, think of what kind of services you really need to support that development, and then work cooperatively to get those included somehow. 'Cause no one wants a school, 5-6 miles from a growth area if it's an elementary school.
Will the 2010 census be something else that you look at as well?
Yeah, and the census will help us, and then Dean's been really great. We had strategic planning here, it's been 3 years ago now, we're working on it again, where he spent a lot of time with our strategic planning committee, looking at what the potential of growth might be in the community, and then where we might fit in, as well as other public needs might fit in. So I think that kind of cooperation is what we need. But then the school boards and other boards have to make a conscious decision. Do we believe that's going to happen, and do we get out there and acquire that property in enough time that we can make it fit into the plan? So I think it's just a matter of working together, but it's got to be a priority. It can't be something that we forget those needs as developers start to develop.
Well, it sounds like you guys have made an ongoing effort to at least keep them informed of this kind of stuff. I think that LU6 should be an ongoing one. It sounds like we're doing a decent job of that right now.
I think LU6 is something that we are doing now, can do better. We spent a lot of time on LU7 and LU7-1, and I think everybody can agree with LU7 about, that talks about protecting, that I think what you heard, the hot button word, is there in LU7-1, and I think there might be a better word than prohibit, and we kind of discussed that, and I guess a better word there, from the perspective of the landowners as well, is maybe the word discourages as opposed to prohibit, because what was discussed is that some of those exceptions that were discussed and that you had discussions about when we talked about the conservation area was something short of a flat prohibition, but I think certainly we want to discourage it. I just, based on all those discussions, seemed like the word prohibit was too strong. Does everybody agree with substituting discourage for prohibit there?
I'm good with that.
That seemed to be the consensus of what we had discussed before. LU8, I think, has to be ongoing. It's not something that we can wait on, because if you don't preserve your edges, you don't have any areas for future growth. I didn't know how you as commissioners prioritize that, but I guess from a staff perspective, we've always seen that as one of our ongoing missions, is to work and communicate with the county so that we do preserve the edges of Salina for future growth. So I guess would most of you agree that that's an ongoing type commitment?
Yes.
And I think the bottom there, the LU82, that is somewhat of a new concept from that the plan is trying to get at, and that is more targeting areas that the city cannot grow in 6 directions simultaneously, and we've been kind of in a reactive or chasing mode. But I think if Mr. Byquist were here, he would be he would be talking about that concept is he bought at that piece of property that is Quail Meadows Estates north of Schilling Road in late 1997, and talked about platting it and developing it then. And he would come in 98 and say, well, you'll have to wait till we get a water line down Ohio Street to Schilling. And he'd come in 1999 and we'd say, you'll have to wait till we get a water line. And finally in 2004, the water line got in, but it's because we haven't really practiced that to say, you know what, this is an area that's targeted for new development. We need to be putting our eggs in this basket, and then discourage extending infrastructure to places that we don't want it. So what that's referring to is the timeliness of doing that, as opposed, if you've got a piece of property we want to see develop, the developer shouldn't have to wait 6 years, to get the infrastructure. As far as GD1 there, I think that's, if you as a commission would agree with the statement of balancing that infill and redevelopment with perimeter growth. I think we hear that a lot discussed on some of the things that are in front of you, but I would assume that's an item that's ongoing. And then underneath that is the word prohibit again, which I think we've agreed ought to be discouraged as opposed to prohibited.
Yes.
And GD 1.3, does everybody agree that that's something that we should be doing now and continue to do?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Because the one classic example when people look at the maps would have been the annexation of the Flying J area out there at Ohio and I-70, that's out there all by its lonesome and disconnected from the city. That is an area where there was development that's not adjacent or near any existing infrastructure. They committed to that site, and the state of Kansas would not approve any type of septic system or lagoon or anything there, basically forced them to connect back to the city's system, which was at Ohio and Pacific, and that was a pretty long run for them and not a very efficient decision. I guess you get to 1.3D there, and I think Mr. Ryan and Mr. Birdsong both kind of mentioned that. Do you as a group think the city's doing a good job of that, or do you think we're in kind of the reactive mode from what you see around with road improvement or widening projects? Do you think it's happening just in time or too late in a lot of cases about the transportation improvements particularly? Do you think, and I think that the commission's been pretty responsible at not trying to encourage or approve developments that have completely inadequate roadways, but is there any cases you think that the city is not working to provide roadway improvements or things soon enough, or do you think that's something that is happening and will just be ongoing?
Dean, I think one of the issues is acquiring enough right of way. for road development. You look at 9th Street and oftentimes, or 9th Street north of, in the Cloud area, look what happened there. They didn't acquire enough right-of-way, consequently everybody built close, and then you can do nothing at that point. I think it's not necessarily developing the road, it's planning and acquiring the right-of-way so you can develop the road whenever the growth, if it does occur.
Is that good in theory but tough in practice, though? At the time that 9th Street was put in there, those, I'm guessing, were probably, platted in the 20s or 30s? John, is that a... Yeah. It would have been hard for somebody to look in the crystal ball and look that far ahead. I mean, although I think it's a great idea, as a practical matter, is it okay to go in and on a 2-lane road and say we want to get it... have an easement of 40 feet, and how does that affect your setbacks and everything else?
Yeah, and there's other examples of that. South Ohio, between Belmont and Magnolia, there was a 4-lane section that was just shoehorned into the existing right-of-way, because otherwise you'd been taking out houses. I think the one South 9th, even in the 20s, was tied in with the US 81 highway. I think it could have been anticipated that was going to be a main north-south thoroughfare, and there are streets like Santa Fe that have plenty of right-of-way, but ones like 9th that don't. And so that that is something I think that is something that, as a commission and a staff, we're doing a better job on new development to make sure that everybody understands what classification that road's going to be and what it will look like. On Magnolia, we have right-of-ways that vary from 100 to 125 or 120 feet in width, which is plenty of right-of-way to allow Magnolia to be widened in the future. That's not the case everywhere, especially in the developed parts of the city. I guess GD2 is improve and stabilize designated areas of change through reinvestment and rehabilitation. The City Commission recently expanded the neighborhood revitalization program, and prior to that time it was probably an exclusively downtown incentive, meaning if you were a commercial business or building owner, to benefit from it, you needed to be in the downtown, but they have expanded that to include Broadway, that corridor from South to Crawford in there. I'm going to assume that you think that that's a fairly high priority and something to focus on. And I guess I jumped down to GD4 because the plan puts a lot of emphasis on that, but it kind of goes back to the mixed use concept. I guess I would, in terms of priorities of things 1 to 5, how does the commission view? I think a corridor redevelopment plan is like a more specialized version of a comp plan, but narrowed down to a specific area. And I guess I would have in terms of priorities, workload, that type of thing, how high on the scale of priorities does your commission see focusing on a specific plan for that Broadway corridor being in the scheme of all the other issues?
Personally, I don't know why that one is a big focus more than some of the other areas. Like to me, the whole North 9th Street corridor coming off of I-70, that's an important access into town. Why not that area? That's my personal feelings.
I guess my question or my thought would be is the infrastructure of the streets are on the Broadway corridor for traffic where it isn't on 9th. If we can get some of that traffic off at 9th and over on the Broadway, because I'm a north end business, and when I have to go to the south end of town, I'm going to Broadway or I'm going to I-35. I'm not going to go down 9th. I'll avoid 9th at every and I don't know how many of it, I mean, I do.
Just because it's faster.
Oh, it's a lot easier to go from my office to the south end of town. It's a lot quicker to go up to Broadway and around, or go out to Ohio, especially at 4 or 5 o'clock. I'm never going to go down 9th Street. You're going to be getting through Cloud. It's going to take you 20 minutes to get through Cloud at 5 o'clock.
Would
And there's nothing we can do with 9th Street. It's going to be that, as Ken said, and
Stuck.
with the development of the Broadway corridor, if we can get stuff out there, even if people come off I-70, they can, I mean, that corner down there, I'm pointing the wrong direction, but the corner of the, is now easier to get through, and if they just can direct them up around Broadway, you're quicker going to the south end of town.
Well, and this is,
That's my-
at one time, we were, and some of the road changes and improvements have been on Broadway between the Viaduct and Pacific. I guess if I just, we've had some discussion about, like, if you look at areas that are somewhat blank slates, you've got the east side of Ohio Street from Magnolia to Schilling is somewhat of a blank slate. You've got the area we call the donut hole, which is the area from the interstate west to Centennial that leads out to K-State Salina, which is kind of a blank slate. You have Broadway in the Crawford South Street area. You got Broadway North, where we've redone the road and made it 3-lane. I guess if you were looking at what we would call a focused corridor plan of those areas as a commission, looking at the importance to the community, which of those, if I said, look at South Ohio, West Magnolia, Broadway South, and Broadway North, which of those 4 would you say, well, this, having a good plan and making sure what we want to see happens, of those 4, how would you rank those? And I guess we'll throw North 9th in there also.
Well, yeah, my question was just why that specific one, but,
Right, but you could see that this plan is saying make that some kind of priority, and the challenge that we have as staff members in relation both to the community and to the commission is that if that is the consultant's opinion, that in terms of implementation, this Broadway corridor has to fit somewhere into a 1 through 5 priority, and I guess where we're at from a staff standpoint is you've only got so many eggs in the basket. If everybody says, well, in my importance of corridors or gateways, that would be 3rd or 4th, not 1st, then it's probably not something that in the plan you'd want to say this is our top priority to get going on this part of the Broadway corridor. If other people think that South Ohio or West Magnolia or North Broadway are more important.
It seems kind of a shame to me in a way that we're always moving on to new territory for development. Infill is really difficult to accomplish, and that's one of the problems you face on Broadway. It's not a bad location. It's just, I think it's more costly to develop in an infill than it is to go to a new spot and develop there. And if we're going to encourage it, we've got to do some things to incent infill, and that's one of the things we talk about in the plan. I can't imagine, Walgreens there's some things that have developed there right on the very corner, but nothing much has developed on past that, and I just think the cost of infill may prevent that, because tipping fees and redeveloping the infrastructure is very costly.
Well, you had 2 hearings on it, but the city commission discussion and hearing on the proposal to vacate Cypress Drive started at 4 and concluded at 7. And of course, the idea is that you would conduct the public hearing and provide all that information to them, so they didn't have to, but it turned out they had a longer one than you did. But what
Hey, we're doing
That-
smarter.
I guess what the way that you look at that is to say, whether it's Arby's or somebody else, it's a heck of a lot easier to go pick out a lot on South 9th Street and put a restaurant out there than it is to try to piece something together on, because Walgreens had to piece together 3 different properties. They had to clear those 3 properties. There was an old gas station there and a car dealership, and their business model was they determined that Broadway and Crawford was the second busiest intersection in the city, and so their business model said that's where they wanted to be. And so they were willing to go through the effort to be there. But it is more work sometimes to piece property together or make it shape or fit if it's infill development. So I guess if you were saying infill is more important than the edges, then you would probably say that the Broadway corridors are more important than, say, South Ohio or something like that.
I think it is. My opinion is, that's right, it is.
And the concern going out is that then those places never get developed and they just keep
Right. They get skipped over.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, in Western Extra Light, for example, the one that we approved and that they went ahead and, they've made that an attractive-looking building. The access maybe isn't 100% prime, but they've made it
for
an
them it's
attractive.
good.
Yeah, for them it's good. The building is attractive, and they utilize something that was, basically a dead horse. And I don't know if we need to incentivize that in some way of realization. Like Ken said, there has to be some kind of hook there to help people over that mental boundary of I'm going to go over here and I'm just going to put something on someplace new.
Didn't we just say that the city commission extended some incentives to that corridor? Did I not hear you just say
That is correct. They expanded the neighborhood revitalization, which is a tax rebate program, and they did extend that to include that area. It goes down as far south as Sunset Plaza and goes all the way up Broadway. And that is an incentive that is prior to that. We had a number of downtown buildings that took advantage of that incentive, and what it is that you basically freeze in your before tax value, and you get rebated back the difference between your after value, after investment, and your before value, so you're not penalized for that. And so that is an incentive that's now available. But I guess what I think I'm hearing from the commission is that if you lined up corridors or things in terms of priorities that or infill versus edge, that you as a commission think focusing on the infill is more important than focusing on the edge at this point.
Well, this whole plan
I think
refers to infill multiple times, from
Right.
commercial to residential to industrial, all types of things. So,
Yeah, and I think that's why they singled out the Broadway corridor here, because that is infill, and part of it is just I think you're all seeing that this plan puts a pretty heavier emphasis on infill versus the outer fringe areas, that can still occur, that's not shut off, but that you as a commission thinks that more attention needs to be paid to infill than has been, and that's what the plan is saying. And that what that does in terms of prioritizing and efforts that staff has, it says we need to continue our emphasis on the infill areas and secondarily to the outline areas. And, in GD5 there, which is the next page, John, that follows right up on that, and they're not mutually exclusive, but they are somewhat contradictory. like I said, if you're Arby's or McDonald's or another business, and I've got a green 250 by 200 foot lot sitting on South 9th Street, while it might be expensive, that's a lot easier to just go in and build on than to try to do something creative on West Crawford or on Broadway. But I guess then if you believe that Broadway and the infill areas, then we as a staff need, and you as a commission need to continue to look for creative ways to make that attractive and work. So I guess if the operative word in this GD5, which I hope everybody can agree in, and that's part of your job to identify what those are, is designated growth areas, is that the city is probably not going to grow west of the airport or out to I-70 or some of those things, and we can't grow in 6 directions. So one of your most important jobs as a planning commissioner is to agree on where those designated areas are, and to be able to say, if somebody comes in here with a plan for something that's not in a designated growth area that doesn't have utilities, that maybe the answer has to be no. And so that's basically what that is saying, and I think that is a priority 1 or ongoing, and I hope most of you saw your role that way. GD6, this is a real task-oriented thing, and a lot of these are tasks, and it's not really, as some of those are more staff than commission. How important is you as a commissioner and your notebooks or whatever up there in terms of prioritizing things, do you think, for staff to come back? And what that is, by saying a citywide master plan, is that we've got areas inside the city limits that are developed that have like 4-inch water lines. For instance, the 2nd Street by the community theater there, those houses are served by a 4-inch water line, and that's a real detriment to fire protection and even in domestic flow. So I guess one question would be, how, in terms of tasks or things, is that developing a master plan for growth areas or a citywide plan, is that something you see more out in the distance than immediate?
Dean, I sort of see this as one way.
Or do you see that as a high priority?
Yeah, I see it as a high priority because I see it as a way to encourage infill development. If you've asked someone to go in and the city doesn't assist, and they're expected to remove the old lines, work around all this buried stuff that's in there, cable, TV, and every other thing, it's just a whole lot cheaper for developers to go out on the edge and start on new soil. So they've got to have some assistance and not be required to replace everything that the city hasn't been able to replace for one reason or another. That's how you help infill development, is not put all that cost on the developer to replace that infrastructure.
Yeah. This is, G6 is obviously an administrative type task, but I just wonder if that wouldn't be helpful for your staff in identifying some of those areas that would be better suited for infill.
I think so. And again, it helps to prioritize those, but it also helps us if you as a commission say you think that's a pretty high priority task. And that's part of the reason we're kind of going through this exercise, is just to get a feel for that. Because this implementation part is really the last part prior to adoption, but it's the part that we need to make sure you understand, and then this is your chance to kind of rank these. These are things that the and he didn't do it arbitrarily, but the consultant said these are tasks or priorities or goals, but it's ultimately up to the Planning Commission and the City Commission to line those up in order of priority or first to least important. And so that's kind of why we had you go through the exercise of looking at the matrix. But that's important for us to hear, that you think the master planning for utilities should be a high priority.
Agree.
John, could you jump to page 13 and the road networks? 'Cause I think this is some things that the Planning Commission that has spent a lot of time talking about and doing. I guess we need to go a little farther, John, to C1. And I think you would all agree from all the conversations we've had that you think C1 is a important priority when we're looking at plans for new development, is to look at pedestrian, bicycle, access to bus stops, all those things you see as important, to recognize those other modes. And that's kind of reinforced in C11 there.
This may be another item similar to what we just talked about on utilities, that encouraging infill, that this may be another planning exercise. Again, a developer is going to go where it makes sense, but if he sees some new trends, and if he sees the city moving more towards or in a different direction, he's going to follow that. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Sure, there are going to be some developments that are going to go on the outskirts of town because that's easy and that's the way they need to go. But again, here, I would think we'd need to look at existing areas that have been designated for infill. Take the south, or that Broadway corridor. If we're going to develop that for multi-use, and if residential's got any kind of component on there, we need to identify sidewalks and those types of things other than just the streets. The streets are fine in that area. For example, 4 lanes and turning lanes and some lights, but if it's got any kind of mixed use, I'm not saying we need sidewalks everywhere. That's just another area of looking further into
what
how
you're
that can-
saying is that we need to focus on the infill areas and look at if there's things that are deficient from a sidewalk or other point that may be barriers to something happening. And you will see it eventually if it happens through a conditional use process. It really threw me for a loop when I first heard about it, and I don't have the graphic here for you, but Monday on this City Commission's agenda would be a request for a resolution of support for a tax credit apartment complex that would basically be a twin of what is at reserves at Prairie Glen. And the proposed location of that is in a pie-shaped wedge that is between Western Extra Light and Kmart. And you might say, well, but all the talk about infill, the talk about mixed uses, what are the candidates for land use over there, it's a fairly good plan layout that fits in there. One of the things I talked to him about was, you may have a bus stop on Broadway, but if you build apartments there, there's no good way for people to get over there. There's no sidewalks on Armory. We have a hit and miss system on Broadway, and so it becomes incumbent on the city and planning commissioners and others to encourage, if that's the goal, to encourage investment that creates housing there. Then it's also incumbent on the city to work to get towards replacing gaps in the sidewalk system and making those things accessible. So I think that's, Mr. Birdsong's hit it on the head, that it's not a matter of saying, no, you shouldn't build there because there's no sidewalks. It's, city, what can you do to take away that as a barrier and disincentive to do that? So, the one way to look is to say, well, that's odd, wedged in between those commercial buildings, but when you start looking at alternative land uses and having activity and investment in the area, it makes some sense. And I said, if what they're applying to the state for tax credit assistance for the financing side of that, but if that gets approved, it will come back to you to actually review the plans for. So I would say that all this language about the connectivity, the walking, biking, transit use, those things would be high priorities for you upon adoption of the plan to keep moving in that direction. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, John, if you could go to 15. I think we could probably agree that C2 is ongoing. And I guess one question that we've never done a real good job on with the Planning Commission, and it's kind of always crossed because of the levy system and things like that. I guess one question we would have for the commission would be as a level of interest. We don't really, I had in my office and have for, I don't know, 20 years, a rolled up plan that was it was a bike route plan for Salina, and sometime in the late 80s or maybe around 1990, all the bike routes disappeared, all the signs disappeared. We don't really have one. I guess how, and from a priority standpoint, how interested is in the Planning Commission and being involved in planning a bike network, or prioritizing, reviewing and prioritizing areas where additional trails or those things would be considered. We periodically get chances, whether it was the stimulus money or some other things, where there's periodically there's opportunities to apply for grant assistance for adding additional trails, but we can't go back and refer to any plan that anyone said, you know, this ought to be a priority. So sometimes they'll come to me or go to others and say, well, if we got more money to add to the levee trail, do something else, what should we do next? Are you as a commission interested in looking at that and seeing what the opportunities are and helping us to prioritize that?
I would say yes. Of all the community meetings that I went to, the very first one that I went to, the hiking, biking, walking trails came out as the single highest priority at that meeting of issues and on interconnectivity, and I was kind of surprised at that. Personally, I use those very much, but and I think that they are an attractive addition to communities, and I think when people go to communities that they look for amenities such as that. But
we went to the state, and I was involved in those meetings in the grant application, but the state, we had a plan to build, starting at Magnolia, all the way around to the west side, even from Crawford down to Cloud, have a pass on the entire levee all the way around the city. And they said, well, we're not going to fund that whole thing. What's your top priority? And we said, well, our top priority would be to connect Magnolia with Bill Burke Park. But that was phase one. There hasn't been anything done since then, nor has there been any prioritizing of that. But that's certainly something that we could present some of that to you and get, if that was something you wanted to sink your teeth into as a priority item, to help plan. Because I said, anytime there's grant funds available, there's no plan to go to say, this ought to be phase two, or this ought to be our priority to connect this with this, or that are you as a commission interested in being involved in that?
yeah, I would be, yeah.
Okay, then we will note that as a priority. And I really, in terms of the matrix, I think it's the land use and the growth and development that we really wanted, and connectivity for you to focus on as far as prioritization. Is there anything in there that, as you look through the matrix or read through those various subjects, was there anything that, even though this turned out to be 37 pages in this format, is there anything in there that was said, why on earth would this be in there? Is there anything in there that was so out of bounds that you thought it should just simply be struck because it was a tremendously bad idea or off base? I think most of these things were things that came out of the focus groups and the community meetings, and they were kind of put down as ideas or things people would like to see, but you can't do all of them in year one. And just having you walk through that and helping us prioritize that, and some of those things are simply ongoing. But is there anything there that anybody thought, this is, who dreamed this up, or where'd this come from? I don't think any of these things were dreamed up. They were, I said they were, most of them were either mentioned in conversations with staff or with, came out of the focus groups or public meetings.
Dean, one of the keys, as I see it, to this is I think we all agree with the various aspects of this, but it's remembering that as we're looking at planning.
Right.
You know, there's so much here, it's hard to keep that in your mind. What all things are important in the planning process? How does this kind of get distilled down so that we have kind of a worksheet to work with?
Well, what we try to do,
we plan.
and why this format, we're going to have to get used to it and adopt it, where it's, when I looked at the plan and then I looked at this and I looked at the plan, I said, well, where are the policies? The policies is what the commissions have basically agreed upon to make priorities, whether it's a buffer between residential and commercial, or we have a policy that says you shouldn't get city utilities without annexation. Those are kinds of policies that are in a plan. One of the things we're going to have to do is take some of these and convert them into policies, and then our job as a staff is, when a case comes before you, our job is to go through here, pull out the relevant policies that apply to that, and remind you as a commission and remind ourselves as staff as to say, you know, here's what our policy says, and that's something that will be a subject of discussion a little bit with the city commission on Monday. Is, okay, we have this plan. It's to build apartments between Western Extralite and Kmart. The land is zoned commercial. You could do apartments there and a conditional use permit, but what do our policies say about that? Well, in the new plan that we're discussing here, it hopes to encourage mixed use development. So if the answer is, well, why would we want apartments built here between these two commercial buildings? It says, well, because the plan that we've been discussing and are ready to adopt says that we should encourage a mix of uses in this corridor. And so that's the kind of thing it's our job to remind you of, or you to remind us of if you see a subdivision that doesn't have connectivity. Because, and I've heard it over and over and over again, somebody has a subdivision, they're laying out, we say, well, you need to stub a street through over to the neighboring property. Well, we were kind of seeing this as kind of an exclusive area. Well, exclusive and connectivity don't, you could still have something that's exclusive in character and still be connected. But there's a tendency for developers that say, well, we're looking at this as an exclusive area, we don't really want to connect with anybody else. But if the policy of the commission is to encourage connectivity, then that's something that you have to look at. If you see a plan for a subdivision that has no connections to adjoining properties. So that would be an example, but our job is when we write a staff report or review something is to pull those back out and remind you, what those agreed upon principles were. So this is very lengthy, but our job would be to, when an application comes in, to go in here and pull out the ones that are relevant and say, here's what the plan says, here's what the application is doing about that, and then you have to be the judge of how close it is. These things were a little bit out of order, but the buried in there is a notice that you were supposed to get behind the comprehensive plan stuff, and it looks like this, but it's buried right there in the middle, and it's a memo to you stating that on Thursday, February 11th, we will have 2 public meetings, and one of those at 3 is more geared towards realtors, lenders, surveyors, insurance agents, and we're going to have some representatives from AMEC, an engineering company, and representatives from city staff. And the way we're going to set that up is we're going to have a general informational presentation, and then we're going to have different stations around the room at the Bicentennial Center where individual property owners can come and look at laptops and look on the screen and say, I live on Ambassador Drive and I want to see how I look on the new map. So we sent letters out to people amounting to about 3,500 different property owners who are either in the flood fringe on the original 86 map or the proposed new map, so they were aware of this, but we wanted to let you know, as whether as planning commissioners or as a property owner yourself, if you were interested in one of these 2 sessions, to be able to come and maybe get questions answered about specific properties or just learn more about the process, because this is not the Planning Commission's involvement as far as the mapping and the regulations that go with it and all that is just beginning. But this is flood insurance on mortgages and things is a sensitive issue financially and otherwise for the community, and so this, if we get the kind of attendance we're expecting, will be some of the largest public meetings we've ever had in Salina. So
Looks good. Okay, we're ready to move on to application, or I'm sorry, item number 3, application Z09-11 filed by the Salina Planning Commission requesting amendment of Article 4, General Use Regulations by adding Section 42-70, Wind Energy Conservation Systems, and repealing the existing Section 42-58, continued from January 19th, 2010 meeting.
I think where we are in both item 3 and item 4 is what you'd have to do with the wind turbine thing is get more specific. We'd have to have something specifically on heights and specifically on setbacks. But as you look at the different items that we tried to address through there as potential requirements or standards or things to think about or address, did we miss anything, or is this things that you as a commissioner would be thinking about if you had or have questions about, should one of these come forward and be reviewed by you? Did we hit all the points that might be questions in your mind that would need to be addressed if a plan for putting up wind turbines, whether it was an individual lot or a church or school wanting to put up a cluster or something like that, or do you think we hit all the bases in looking at that? Or did we overkill it? There's actually, when you get into it, there's actually a lot of questions and things that come up that you have to think about, both as relates to safety, long-term impact on neighbors. But it comes up on cell towers, and it comes up on these type of things about whether they're lighted or can have lights or have to have lights. How easy are they to climb? Should we make them be tucked behind fences or not? What happens if they aren't maintained? What happens if somebody moves and the new person doesn't want to maintain it? And what happens if somebody puts one up where everybody believes there's not good access to wind to keep it running? I guess that's one of the hardest judgment calls to make. But I guess that was our best effort at trying to identify requirements or checklist of questions or things that you would seemingly want to make sure were addressed in any kind of application to put one up.
Dean, how does this particular recommendation here address setbacks on?
It does not. We would have to come back with something that, I guess, these were items that we thought were givens that said no matter where you come down on height or setbacks, these are things that an applicant or a proposal ought to address, or at least be able to ask questions about to make sure they were understood. The two biggest variables from a conditional use standpoint are setback and height. And so our first pass at this was to say, do you agree that these are things that should be questions asked and answered in any kind of application? And then we're going to have to come back with some options to choose from as to maximum height and or variable scale for height. There's lots of stuff in the literature about the need for height, but a lot of cases, if you have openness or open areas and a different design, height might not be as critical. I had some photos of, we put in there some meeting minutes from the city of West Des Moines, Iowa, and in there the conditional use permits are done by the Board of Adjustment, not the Planning Commission. But I put that in there because it was the very first case of wind turbines coming before that board, and they had a whole lot of questions about it. And so I put that in there so you could see what kind of questions were asked and discussed at a conditional use hearing.
The vertical axis style wind turbines, that'd be the...
Yeah, like the spiral.
Right.
And I thought the thing that was noticeable about this was that their request was to install two of them that were 30 feet tall. Well, 30 feet tall, in this particular case, the church building is 40 feet tall. Huh. And so it wasn't particularly, but churches and schools, a lot of cases, have areas on their property that are relatively wide open. And so in this case, you know, it wasn't a design that needed to be 80 feet tall. And so we also put that in there just to indicate that, you know, if you look at some of the literature or things put out by the associations, they say, well, you know, you should allow for 80-foot turbines by right, you know, on any lot. Well, it could be that if your preference is to nudge people towards these vertical axis style or to encourage those, then, you know, if you can do that and make it work with a 30-foot height, then you shouldn't you should have a maximum height that's allowable and then require, you know, a variance or something from that to go up to 80 or 100 feet. So those are some things where we have to give you some options or choices on, but the purpose of coming back with this was twofold, just so you could look at thoughts about meeting electrical codes and building codes, and do we need an engineer to certify the structural aspects of it, and how do you address abandonment, should they have insurance, those kind of things. So the first pass was to see if you thought that was overkill, or those are all things that should need to be addressed.
I think, when I was reading through those, I thought they were very thorough. Except, of course, for the height and setback.
And I think that's where judgment is going to enter in, and that we would need to give you some choices. And I guess we did have some language in there about, or intended to, about what would happen if one was abandoned or somebody moved out and didn't take them with them, and we need to address abandonment as well. But I guess that would be a useful question if you think that you want to design this in a way to encourage the vertical spiral type design more so than the horizontal blade design. Then you might write your height standards and things accordingly, and obviously setbacks according to blade diameter and things like that are much less critical if your preference is to encourage the vertical design. Would it be helpful to you to get some additional photos or examples of the various types of designs and get those defined? So that it might be, say, if you have this type, the height limit is this, and if you have this type, then your height limit and setback is this. Would that be helpful?
Because nobody in town's going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But I think we almost need a glossary of photos or something to match up the terminology with the vision.
Right. But I had, somewhere in here it said something about ice throw on the propeller type ones. Is that a problem? I mean...
It has been identified as a problem, or things that would be, one of the things that I learned on my very first cell tower is that, and we were trying to write setbacks and things for cell towers, and a lot of we have a requirement that your cell tower has to be a distance away from property equal to its height. And some of that is dealing with collapse of the tower, but then in reading some of the literature, ice fall off of cell towers is a bigger problem than the actual collapse of the towers. And we had the first tower that went up in Salina was Kansas Independent Network and Kansas Cellular, then Alltel, and on down the line out on Graves Boulevard. And they put one up in the corner of their parking lot. And then we were getting, and it became a neighbor issue also, but you had the travel plaza just to the south of that, and we found that with north winds that there were people who had been parking vehicles somewhat underneath the cell tower, but to the south of it, and in the wintertime, they were getting some substantial damage to their cars from ice that was built up on the tower and then either fall or blow off. So there is some on the spinning blades. You can get ice built up on there, and then by ice throw, meaning it warms up or the blade starts going and the ice is propelled off the blade and then can potentially cause damage to other neighboring properties. So I think a lot of that goes just to understand the different characteristics of that, and I don't, those are just, what those 1 through 9 that's a list of questions that neighbors often have if if they come to a public hearing and somebody wants to put up a wind turbine. What's it going to do to the aesthetics or the property values in the neighborhood? How noisy are they? Are they going to attract lightning? Are they going to be grounded? How close can they be to my property line? Are they going to throw ice off the blades and hit my property? Am I going to be in my house and have these shadows from the moving blades passing across all the time? Am I going to find dead birds in my yard, chopped up?
More from your cat.
How high does it need to be to actually pick up the wind, and what happens if my neighbor moves and leaves it behind? So that was kind of like, okay, here's the things that have come up as objections to turbines, and then the items on the next part are ways that some of those things have been addressed, or things that you would probably want to know or confirm with an applicant, and how the turbine's actually designed to work and all. And I think that the 3 variables are what should be a maximum height or an expected height, what type of setbacks are safe and appropriate, and then the third part is, do you want to design it in a way so it encourages the vertical axis style as opposed to the other style? And then if that's the case, you need to have like a notebook or something that says, when we talk about this type of turbine, this is what it looks like. When we talk, and here's its characteristics. If we're talking about this type, here's what it looks like, and here's the characteristics. I think you need that before you pin down height and setback thing, and then maybe you can form because I honestly believe that if this proposal that's discussed in the minutes here in the city of West Des Moines, if that had been for a 90-foot tall horizontal blade, 2 of those on a church property, I don't think it would have been well received.
Going on them.
So, and I went to attended a church committee meeting where building projects were discussed, and the members of the church says, well, when are we going to build our own wind turbine to power this? And I said, well, people are out there thinking about it, so but nothing specific has come forward. But other than, I think we missed language on abandonment. Is there anything there? Is it overkill, or is it just you think that's thorough and something that we should be able to answer at any particular meeting for an application that comes before you? I mean, it just seemed to me like these were questions that if you were a commissioner, is this going to have lights? What color is it going to be? How are you going to keep people from climbing it? Is this going to be designed to generate electricity? How much noise does it make? Are you going to connect to the grid? Do you have insurance? How is it going to be grounded electrically, structurally, that type of thing? Are you pretty well in agreement that we're on track there?
Yes.
Yes.
Looks really thorough.
Okay. I think we need to come back with the illustrations and things for the next time. What we did on the other was the same thing. It was primarily just to give you examples of formats for districts like that. I took note that not any one of these things are are perfect, but maybe having colleges and universities would not include, but the second one there talked about K through 12 public or private schools. It had parks, recreational trails, school bus base, vocational schools, those types of things, and then it had some things that were conditional, like heliports, jails, landfills, work release facilities, so not every public use is equal. Landfills and parks aren't equal. Fire stations and work release facilities aren't equal. So that's just to give you an example of what we would try to address would be permitted uses, what should be conditional, and then some things about setbacks, minimum lot size, things like that. But we wanted to share that with you both to show some formats and just what is done in the way of uses that it's trying, a district like this would try to accommodate. If you look at the very last page, it says the purpose of the Public Facilities District is to provide for publicly owned parks and open space and public facilities that are located permanently in a specific location, such as schools, government facilities, etc. And based on our conversation about broadening this out, is that somewhat in agreement with where you're at, or seeing that philosophically? Would that be a good statement of what our intent is here?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot more detailed than what I expected in my mind, I guess, when we were first talking about it, but it's good.
So these are, I know they are not ready for adoption, fleshed out, everything drafts, but they're more or less a progress report and working towards getting something that's good enough to actually adopt and put into a code format. It's hard to remember them all because we had so many all at once, but we have something on the order of 5 items for your next agenda, the 16th, and we have Casey's General Store has purchased the Green Lanterns, and being an Iowa company, they think their car washes need doors and blowers, and so they want to modify the automated bays at the Green Lanterns to have enclosed doors and then have a blower system at the end. Well, when both of those went in, there was a lot of sensitivity about the noise from vacuums and how loud the car wash was and all of that. So before those are added, those are both planned commercial districts at 9th and Crawford and Iron, Ohio. We've notified abutting owners of that proposed change, and there'll be a hearing on that the 16th here. We had an application filed to plat and rezone and annex 150 acres at Schilling and Ohio, northeast corner, around the sand pit area there, and that was referred over to Ken so he could tell us what school district that would be in if we had added all those houses. And I don't know if they'll all fit or not, or you guys will be building a new school, but there's 208 lots in that. They're not going to develop all at once, but it's good for planning purposes. And then we had a rezoning request for there's a lot on South 9th, just north of Crawford, that has a somewhat dilapidated multifamily structure on it that when the air base was active somehow got 5 units into it, and they'd like to tear that down and build back a new 5-plex there on 9th Street north of Crawford. You'll see that. And then we had a text amendment where we have an individual that wants to do window tinting of automobiles at their residence, and our home occupation guidelines don't presently permit that, and they want the opportunity to persuade you that that's a good thing to be able to do in a residential setting. And so that will be on your agenda as well. And we may have some updates on this. It's not finalized yet, but we may attempt at your March meeting to look at having, and it doesn't mean that you take action or do anything, but having what we would call an adoption hearing on the comp plan, and send out all of our notices and get input from people, and also have Graham Smith, our planning consultant from Gould Evans, here as well. So we'll update you on that.
And that would be the public meeting.
It would be a
portion
public
of that.
meeting to solicit the official public comment, and as opposed to informal or what you've been hearing to date from some of the conservation landowners or Stan Byquist, but to actually have a public hearing and send notices out and say, come and tell the planning commission what you think about it.
Very good.
That'll move us one step closer to adoption.
Great. If there are no other matters, we're adjourned.
Did you say the northeast corner?
Northeast corner of Shilling and Ohio.
Wait.